I'm Kourtney Smith.
And I'm Elyse Sharp.
And we are two nerds who are here to make Shakespeare easier to understand.
In this podcast, we will explore as many dimensions to Shakespeare's plays as we can by looking at the text, examining the historical context in which the plays were written, and how his plays are viewed through modern lenses of feminism, racism, classism, colonialism, nationalism, ableism, all of the isms.
We will discuss how his plays shaped both the past and present, and, as theater makers, how his plays can be responsibly performed today, all while trying our best to approach his works without giving in to Bardolatry.
So, Shakespeare anyone?
Hi, listeners. Want to support Shakespeare Anyone? Visit shakespeareanyone.com/support or check out the links in our episode description. Now, onto the episode. Hi, Elyse.
Hi, Kourtney.
How's it going?
It's going pretty well. How are you?
I'm doing really well. As listeners know, I'm in the process of finishing a master's dissertation in Shakespeare Studies. And Elyse and I are recording this episode 2 days before my submission deadline, but this episode is coming out 3 days after my submission deadline. So I'm in this episode, I'm kind of like
in dissertation
limbo. Yeah, I'm in dissertation limbo. So recording Kourtney is really excited to finish this beast, and then release Kourtney is relieved that I finished the beast. So that's me.
Oh, that's very exciting.
Yeah.
And recording me is getting ready to go into rehearsals for the family-friendly play about Shakespeare that I co-wrote. And Release Me will have just had first rehearsal. So that's very exciting. Before we get into our housekeeping, what are we talking about today?
Our topic today is really about Caliban, the character Caliban, through colonialism, racism, and the kind of ways in which those areas of study affect our reading of this character. So yeah, today's the Caliban episode.
Yes. And now for a little housekeeping. We have a couple new Patreon patrons to give a big shout out and thank you to. Thanks, and ever thanks to Jennifer Bruce and Michelle Buxman for joining our crew of Patreon patrons and supporting the work we do on this podcast. We also have wrapped up our Hot Shakespeare summer. We had such a blast seeing Shakespeare, seeing where you saw Shakespeare or where you performed Shakespeare. So thank you to everybody who submitted their Hot Shakespeare summers to us. It was so much fun to see. And, maybe we'll bring it back next summer because it was a blast.
Yeah, I think we should bring it back.
Yeah.
Summer is quintessential Shakespeare season, so.
I agree. Now let's dive into Caliban, colonialism, and racism as they appear in The Tempest. Kourtney, you're going to start us off with something I've been really excited to hear about because you have been telling me about this research that you did about a detail in Caliban's punishment by Prospero that is in the text and what that would have meant to Shakespeare's audience.
Yeah, I'm really excited to revisit this article. I first read this article in one of my modules, and I was just so blown away by this research. My reading is from the article Pinching Caliban, Race, Husbandry, and the Working Body in the Tempest by Patricia Akimi. And this is a piece that combines 3 areas of study, so sensory studies, husbandry, and race. And through these 3 different areas of study, Akimi explores Caliban and the pinch, those torments that Prospero subjects Caliban to, through the study of husbandry and estate management and power dynamics. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up some scaffolding for a couple of different concepts, and then I'm going to bring all of them together to share Akimi's fascinating argument about the significance of the pinch. Mm-hmm. It's more than just pinching with your fingers. It has a lot of really powerful effects on Caliban, and so I'm excited to share this with you. Pain is a factor that drives characters in this play. Ferdinand is driven by the pain of labor. When he's cutting logs for Miranda, he mentions that he's in pain, but he's doing it for her. Ariel goes through pains, doing tasks for Prospero, and Ariel's pains are part of Ariel's quest for freedom. However, Caliban's pains are punishing pains. These pains enslave him rather than Ariel goes through pains that are supposed to guarantee him freedom. Caliban seem never-ending. Caliban repeatedly refers to these pains as torment, and the word used most is pinch. And at the end of the play, in Act 5, Scene 1, when Caliban has been found out, he says, "I shall be pinched to death." However, pinching is not something that causes death. So pinching is intended to alter behavior, and it also affects the shape and color of the body and the mind. And Hakimi argues that Caliban's bodily shape is of Prospero's making. Prospero's pinches are given to Caliban through spirits. The spirits give Caliban pinches, bites, pricks. It is a state that includes spots, small depressions, indentations, tears, temporary or permanent injuries from nips, bites, or squeezes, and the recipients are then misshapen, and they can be transformed for the worse. They do this to punish Caliban's rebellious cursing, and it goads him into working. And Hakimi argues his physical differences are seen as a lack of education, ambition, ability, and humanity by others, and so pinching punishes personal ambition and self-improvement, and the withdrawal of affection, education, and opportunity at Prospero's hands. Both Prospero and Caliban give accounts of their early relationship. Caliban showed Prospero the resources of the island, and Prospero educated Caliban and taught him Prospero's language. But this changed after Caliban's alleged attempt to claim the island by taking Miranda, and Prospero and Miranda both justify Caliban's new treatment following this incident. Prospero justifies Caliban's punishment for the attempted rape of Miranda, and Miranda actually justifies the punishment by saying that Caliban is one of a vile race, a race that cannot be improved. So she goes more than just like the individual. She's making justifications based off of Caliban's race. The island also can be seen as a space of estate management. I promise this will all start to blend together.
Okay.
But we've got the pinch. And now let's talk about estate management. The island is a space in which the management of land, similar to the country estate or farm, is synonymous with the management of the state. So in a way, Prospero's island is a lordship.
Right.
And he suggests in Act 5, Scene 1, that he became landed because he landed on the shore, but doesn't see it as a site for settlement. So he doesn't want to remain there. He wants to go back to his dukedom in Milan, but he landed and is landed. We know early on in the play that both Caliban and Prospero have competing claims over the island. Caliban, on the other hand, covets the island and sees it as fertile and full of wonders. Caliban's labor of husbandry stakes his claim to mastery and lordship of the island, so that's why Caliban says he has claim over the island. Prospero uses rhetoric and threat of force to give himself a kind of ownership over the island. Prospero owns all of the profits of Caliban's labor while depriving Caliban of access to improvement of any kind, so that's like Prospero's rule over the island. So there's this kind of like estate management based on cultivation, resources, and husbandry. In early modern England, husbandry manuals, so how-to books about farming, wrote about how to elevate the estate, but the tactile work of husbandry, so grubbing in the dirt and working the land, is considered less glamorous and assigned to tenant farmers and laborers, the people who own land versus those who work on the land. And Hakimi is now like starting to look through husbandry manuals to add some more dynamics to this like estate management. A pinch is also a basic technique used in husbandry.
Okay.
Here we go. We're starting to weave these things together. These seemingly
It's all coming together now.
Okay,
Yeah.
First we're talking about Caliban and the violence.
Yeah,
and
it's like okay, I get that column. Okay, I get that column.
Here we are. And so husbandry manuals advise when and where to apply or remove pinches. The most common is sustenance, such as pinching food or water. And Thomas Tusser advises husbandmen to give young cattle plenty of water and food year-round, but to reduce their access to the pasture in summer months. So there's this like, give them the food and the water they need, but also pinch reduce their access to the pasture in the summer months. It's a little unclear why. He references like the cattle will be lusty and sound in the summer unless you pinch them of pasture. Maybe you have to
gotta fix those cows' humors, you know?
Yeah, you're right. It all comes back to the humors. So those working on these estates and working the land, working in husbandry, they were planning and they were managing their plants, their livestock, their estates, their laborers, using this idea of the pinch.
Mm-hmm.
In Charles Estienne's The Country Farmer of 1600, Estienne advises the land-owning gentleman farmer that livestock and plants can be pinched of water or food. And this is, we're anticipating future seasons. So you're giving enough water to make sure that they grow. You're not overwatering them so they get drowned. The pinch is this resource management.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The farmers may also be pinched or undersupplied with the things that they need. However, the farmers should be supplied generously if the Lord can. But technically, you can pinch a farmer, you can undersupply them if you need to. Also, an ideal farmer should be without ambition. So the farmer that's working for the land-owning gentleman, he should not be ambitious.
Mm-hmm.
And the Lord should counsel the farmer for the things the farmer needs to improve. So if a farmer is working for a landed gentleman and he's doing something not sufficiently, the ideal that Estienne suggests is that a lord should counsel the farmer for the things that the farmer needs to improve. So don't pinch them, don't undersupply them. Supply them so the farmer only aims to please the Lord. So you're trying to make sure that he is a loyal and good worker on the farm. And the ideal farmer is also imagined to be built for labor and nothing else. So the ideal farmer cannot have claim to any land outside of the Lord's, and that is seen as competition. And so this pinching tool sustains the status quo between the landowner and the land worker. You're providing what you need to, you're providing what you can to help someone cultivate or grow, but then you can undersupply or not give access if you need to, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now I've set the scene for this estate management and this husbandry. I want to go back and talk about Caliban and how Akemi weaves in this kind of estate management, this kind of husbandry, and this pinch all together to talk about Caliban and the island, Caliban and Prospero. As I said earlier, Miranda suggests that Caliban earned his punishments because of his race. So Miranda blames Caliban and his entire race for being bad.
Mm-hmm.
But Akemi argues it is actually Prospero's deprivation that changes Caliban into a monster. Caliban claims Prospero took his land, redrew the borders, and stole it from him, and the pinch of deprivation is payback for Caliban's power of the island. He knows where to get the best food and fire. Caliban could deprive Prospero and Miranda, but the pinches, the indentured servitude of slavery, estranged from acceptance and family, because remember, Caliban's also deprived of education and deprived of family, of nurturing.
Of any human connection before sort of exile him or reject him. He also loses that companionship.
Yeah. And this withholding, this pinch, deprives, degrades, and deforms Caliban. Prospero's devaluation of Caliban's mind and abilities, the denial of Caliban's claim to the island, in spite of Caliban's subsistence survival skills. If you go back to the estate management and the husbandry manuals, Prospero is that land-owning gentleman, and Caliban is that ideal farmer.
Mm-hmm.
The ideal farmer should not have ambition. The ideal farmer should not have any sort of land and doesn't have claim to land.
Mm.
And Caliban is strange to look at, according to how other characters react to him, but there's actually no clear description of Caliban's appearance in the text of the play. What we do know is that Prospero claims that Caliban's body and mind are conflated, his manner and his shape, his monstrous body and mind. Caliban's shape is associated with his inability to improve, be educated, and his uncultivated nature. And so clearly what we see in these early acts of the play, Prospero is not nurturing Caliban. Like the ideal landowning gentleman and farmer, Prospero is not supplying Caliban and helping him and praising him and giving him advice on how to improve. That kind of suggestion, how to treat your farmers, your tenant farmers, Prospero isn't using that tactic to gain obedience from Caliban. Instead, pain is the way that Prospero gains Caliban's obedience. And there's a line that Prospero says, he says, "Whom stripes may move, not kindness." And that recalls the language in domestic manuals. Stripes were a form of correction for household servants and visual proof of innate waywardness. That was the justification. Like, if somebody has enough stripes on them, it's proof that they just are innately wayward. And so this is an example of Caliban's body being deformed and changed by Prospero and Prospero's punishments. When Caliban is rebelling against Prospero with Stefano and Trinculo, Caliban warns them of Prospero's pinches, how they change tissue, bone, and appearance. And Prospero says that he is going to give these 3 spots or bruises all over their bodies so that they look like leopards. So that's a way to change the appearance through the pinch. Prospero also promises cramps, side stitches, the all-night pinch. He mentions pinch looking like honeycombs. So like it's very sensory, very visual, and it's like very bodily, the pinch, the way that the pinch affects the body. And Prospero's punishments of Caliban are not necessarily like at the hands of an angry master who is taking leather and hitting a servant. The punishments, the torments that Prospero puts onto Caliban are mystical, and they appear to be in direct response to not only Caliban's actions, but also his thoughts. And at the end of the play, Caliban, Stefano, and Trinculo are recognizable by the changes in their shapes when Prospero commands the courtiers to recognize their servant status, and then Prospero claims Caliban. So like Prospero has to command the courtiers to recognize Caliban, Stefano, and Trinculo, who had undergone the pinch.
Mm-hmm.
So this pinch could have like deforming, like it changes the body.
Qualities,
yes. And then at the end of the play, Stefano rejects his identity. He calls himself but a cramp. So the pinch isn't just a bodily mark, but it's also a social identity. And Caliban agrees at the end to be a misshapen and bad-mannered creature. So the pinch is this tool to withhold or restrict access to the kind of nurturing that conduct books maintained are necessary to grow a better subject, a better person, and in the case of like these husbandry manuals, a better tenant farmer. So that's my reading on Caliban and the pinch.
Wow.
I don't know if I scaffolded it well, listeners.
No, I think it is really helpful to hear sort of these ideas that were present in Shakespeare's time, that these words would have meant something other than like the action of pinching somebody today. Like it has a broader implication. It reminds me of like our Ophelia, Gertrude, and Female Agency deep dive into Shakespeare's audience. Hearing those plants together, it would mean something different than it does for us today, and that it's used throughout this play to mean like a very powerful thing. I was really taken by the idea of Caliban's appearance being caused by punishment. Some of the mooncalf, monster parts of him are not due to qualities he was born with, but they are marks of his treatment by Prospero. Is really interesting.
Also looking through the estate management and the husbandry manuals, learning that kind of withholding of nurture was not recommended.
Yeah.
That was not seen as the appropriate way to treat your laborers.
Yeah.
And yet Prospero doesn't do the nurturing part of it. He does the withholding pinch part of it.
Yeah.
Additionally, like a bonus thing that Akimi mentioned was that like in the colonial context, it was the colonists who lacked a technical know-how of food and shelter, but authors during that colonizing time period wrote promotional literature about these new places they were at, similarly shifted this kind of lack of civility onto the indigenous groups and labeled them violent, subhuman, and savage, and then took control over their islands or their lands, even though the indigenous people are the ones who knew how to live on the island. So this goes beyond just like the estate management and Caliban and Prospero, but like even though Shakespeare is technically proto-colonial, this kind of language continues into the colonial England. But I do know that we want to talk more about Caliban, colonization, race, especially Caliban's legacy.
Yeah.
And you have some reading about Caliban in this kind of post-Shakespeare.
Yes. So my reading primarily comes from an article by Trevor R. Griffiths, his 1983 article, This Island's Mine, Caliban and Colonialism, in which Griffiths traces ideas associated with Caliban that have, quote, been applied to or directly influenced a considerable number of interpretations of the Tempest, unquote, in England between the 1830s and 1880s. So we're going to get into sort of our more modern understandings of Caliban and get up to the 1980s and see how these ideas that one of the things I'm taking away from what you've brought is these ideas have been there since Shakespeare was writing and may have been understood by his audiences to connect to husbandry and to punishment and to like maybe not good husbandry, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to talk a lot about how Caliban has been portrayed and has been sort of the touch point in the play upon which the play either does or doesn't engage with themes like colonialism, racism, and classism over time. Prior to the 1800s, critics responding to performances of Caliban were dominated by this interest in like preternatural beings, in which Caliban was sort of characterized as a comic mythical creature like the faun or the satyr in between the Restoration in the 1600s and the 1800s. Caliban is primarily seen as, this comic mythical creature.
Maybe him being fishy.
If you remember, I think we talked about this in our Stuff to Chew On episode. Between the when theater comes back after the Restoration, there's adaptations of The Tempest that are more popular than Shakespeare's version for a while. So it's in these other adaptations that we're also seeing Caliban as kind of a funnier comic relief character. And then in the 1800s, that's when we start to see theatrical interpretations of Caliban start to reflect colonial and class-based themes, where Caliban starts to appear as a indigenous person, as a political revolutionary, also as a, quote, Darwinian missing link, and laterally to some sensitive critics, an oppressed minority, unquote. So we start to see these ideas, these interpretations of Caliban, the seeds of them begin to grow.
You know what I really wish we had from Shakespeare's day is we have very few illustrations of costumes, of sets, of all that. Like, I just want to go back in time and get a snapshot of how Caliban was costumed and like bring it back, you know?
Yeah.
Just because he seems like this massive mystery.
Yes. Well, I do have we do know a little bit about at least what theaters were doing in the 1800s, though.
That's not Shakespeare's
That's not
time.
Shakespeare.
Everyone's like, what would Shakespeare's theater have done? Yeah.
Who knows?
Who knows?
But in 1838, William Charles Macready restores Shakespeare's text as the authoritative version of The Tempest with great success. This was also, coincidentally, the year where slavery was finally abolished in the British Empire. Although abolitionists, as far as Griffiths was able to find, did not connect Caliban to pro-abolition propaganda. However, at least one audience member of Macready's production wrote a pamphlet about the production that included analysis of this production's portrayal of Caliban that praised the actor's performance and made a connection that, quote, Prospero was partly to blame for Caliban's behavior since he imprudently placed this wild and untutored creature in a position which made his rape attempt more feasible, unquote. And so we get like someone going, Prospero's kind of to blame for how Caliban's behaving. And the pamphlet goes on to argue that Caliban has redeeming qualities. So Griffiths argues that these two things are sort of the first spark of the idea of post-colonial readings of The Tempest, although they are not polished. This is the 1830s.
Yeah, we're going to have some problems.
We're going to have some problematic takes on The Tempest in my section.
We'll have like half-baked, or not half-baked, but like they're getting there.
But we'll see how these ideas have evolved and devolved and then evolved again.
Okay.
So from 1838, there's not another like big step forward in the portrayal of Caliban until 1848, in which a burlesque version of The Tempest by William and Robert Brough called The Enchanted Isle creates an overtly pro-republic Caliban instead of pro-monarchy. And this play is, quote, full of satirical allusions to the social upheavals of that year, many of them made through Caliban, who is described in the cast list as a hereditary bondsman, who, in his determination to be free, takes the most fearful liberties, unquote. So Caliban is identified textually with anti-slavery. He, in his text, uses pre-existing anti-slavery slogans, things that abolitionist groups are using in their propaganda, things that are commonly said in the anti-slavery movement. And then at one moment, he takes on the symbols of the French Revolution. He enters to the sound of the Marseillaise. He wears a cap of liberty on his head and has a red flag in one hand. So he is depicted as a member of the proletariat, and contemporary illustrations do not indicate that this Caliban was performed in blackface. So this is a white-presenting Caliban, from what we know from contemporary illustrations, who is tied to anti-slavery and proletariat movements in the mid-1800s.
I think that's really interesting, too, you pointing out the fact that this is not in blackface, because, like...
Oh, I will know when we do get that.
Okay. But I was going to say that's really good to know, because, like, we don't actually know if Caliban was historically portrayed in blackface like Othello would have been. Same with Aaron, but we don't know about Caliban. So that's a really good point that I'm glad that you Griffiths
traced that, where at least in England, where we see the first portrayal of Caliban in blackface. And I will get to that.
Okay.
So again, Caliban's starting to be seen as this point where he can be interpreted as a member of oppressed minority, or as somebody who is politically to the left of, the 1800s England.
Yeah, ruling class.
Yeah. Then Charles Darwin publishes his evolutionary theories, and Caliban starts to be interpreted as, in the 1860s, like Shakespeare's like incredible, like pre-existing knowledge of Darwin's missing link idea.
Because he's ahead of his time.
Ahead of his time. He's a genius. He knows so much. As well as the native of the island who has things to learn from Prospero, and a member of a rebellious proletariat class. And, quote, these categories were by no means discrete, and the virtual interchangeability of typifications of class and race in much later 19th century thought makes it particularly difficult to differentiate between Caliban as native, as proletarian, and as a missing link, unquote, in productions of this time. Those distinctions blur together for productions and critics. And during this time, Caliban is also used in political cartoons as a representation of an enslaved person under American slavery.
Oh. Okay.
So then these three versions of Caliban as native, as lower class, and as missing link, start to develop in parallel. The missing link Caliban starts to, quote, develop along the lines of an anthropoid ape, unquote, which is problematic when the ideas of evolution, race, and class are so intermeshed during this time. So, like, here's some problematic takes from the late 1800s. And here's how we see that show up in Caliban. For a while, we see this sort of, like, ape-like Caliban. It's not good.
No.
Critics do not respond well to this in this time. Like, they speak to wanting a more human Caliban. So then, in 1871, we see the first Caliban since 1838, quote, to give a complex reading of the character and also a significant innovation in staging. The final scenes of the 19th century Tempest productions had concentrated on Ariel and Prospero, often with spectacular scenes of Ariel's flight and Prospero's departure on the restored ship. No specific provision was made for either leaving Caliban on the island or taking him away, unquote. This 1871 production had the usual ending for Ariel and Prospero, but also added, quote, the abandonment of the island to the sole charge of Caliban, who, as the curtain descends, lies stretched upon the shore, basking in the rays of the setting sun, unquote. And contemporary responses are similar to what they were for that earlier 1838 production. They respond really positively to this portrayal of Caliban and his emotional and intellectual range with sensitivity, and see him as a person, albeit a, quote, undeveloped native who may be controlled by Prospero's educated, developed intellect, unquote. This is still an improvement from the ape-like characterization that came immediately before. However, Darwinian Caliban gets a boost in popularity after a book by Daniel Wilson called Caliban, the Missing Link is published, which argues explicitly that Shakespeare had some magical pre-knowledge about the missing link in Darwin's evolutionary chain when he was writing Caliban, and that was his intention. You're like, cut him off.
Yeah, we're sitting here like, get the cane, pull him off.
Yeah. So unlike the theatrical portrayals that were Darwinian in nature, because even the theatrical portrayals that were Darwinian were still kind of riding a line of human and ape, but Wilson argues that Caliban was more creature than man who needed tutoring but had, quote, some spark of rational intelligence, unquote, which is super similar to imperialist theories who defended Europe, quote unquote, civilizing other cultures. Wilson also problematically argues that Caliban is more advanced than actual indigenous peoples, placing specifically Aboriginal peoples below Darwin's missing link in this racist evolutionary chain that he was publishing. Griffiths, the writer of this article that I read, notes that these thoughts are, quote, not rigorous scientific proofs, but much looser processes of association in which prejudice and simplification distort popular perceptions of complex scientific analysis, unquote. So,
yeah,
there is no science here. This is taking some scientific ideas, misunderstanding them, and distorting popular understandings of complex scientific analysis.
Yeah, like a pseudoscience.
It's a little pseudoscience-y.
Yeah.
In contrast, in 1892, in an article for Harper's New Monthly magazine, Andrew Lang argued that Caliban and indigenous peoples, quote, were exploited innocents whose potential was abused by the colonizers, unquote. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit infantilizing, but the power dynamics are being recognized.
These things are being recognized. These ideas are starting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Lang draws parallels between Caliban's treatment and punishment with how colonizers treated native populations all over the world. So these parallels are starting to be drawn. Yes, it's infantilizing to call anybody an innocent, but at least these ideas are starting to form. People are starting to think critically about colonization and using Caliban to have that conversation. However, at the end of the 19th century, we see the first actor to, quote, consciously play the part as a sort of missing link, unquote. This actor's wife documented the actor's process. She, by the way, is not impressed with his performance or his interpretation of Caliban in her writing. She talks about how he went to the zoo and observed monkeys and baboons, and she describes that he was costumed as, quote, half monkey, half coconut, unquote. He also chose to carry a real fish in his mouth, quote, which caused considerable distress when the property manager forgot to change it often enough, unquote. So the wife's not a fan. Then another critic contrasts this actor's performance with how Shakespeare wrote Caliban, noting that Shakespeare wrote a character who, quote, is a monster, but human, surly, brutal, cunning, servile, lustful, and vindictively cruel, unquote, while saying that this portrayal was, quote, a comic and amusing Caliban who was kind of a man-monkey, unquote. And many other initial critical responses were shaped by the actor's physical choices and athletic antics, and similarly were just like, this is not what Shakespeare wrote this character to be.
No.
Additionally, quote, in all these judgments, and in the actor and his wife's own comments, there is no sense of an ideological framework underlying this interpretation. The idea of Caliban as man-monkey or missing link is handled perfectly neutrally, although one critic, known as Lady Visitor, shows some inkling of an understanding of the ramifications of the play, unquote. So this is sort of like horse and carriage, bumper sticker Shakespeare, having this interpretation intentionally of Caliban as Darwin's missing link, intentionally.
Yeah, without looking at the text to say, where is it supported?
Where is it supported? Or is this problematic?
That too.
And yeah, the Lady Visitor is like, is this kind of terrible to like portray a person like this? The thoughts don't go deeper. During this time.
It's starting though.
It's starting. And then this production continues to be performed throughout England. And in later performances, the actor continues to earn admiration for his athleticism. But even when critics, audience members, people who write about in reaction to this production link his portrayal to the idea of the missing link, they don't go deeper into the implications of this interpretation, what doing this on stage means. They might be like, oh, I think they're doing this, but they don't go into like, well, hold on. If we're saying Caliban's the missing link, what does that actually imply? And
yeah,
this version of Caliban was, quote, deliberately based on monkeys, making Caliban, the dispossessed native, an ape as well as a sympathetic character. And it was seen by vast numbers over a very lengthy period all over the British Isles, thus fixing an interpretation of Caliban for several generations of actors and audiences, unquote. So this production and this one actor choosing this missing link Caliban, even though contemporary critics, there were audience members who did not find it effective and found it, they weren't quite there to say.
They weren't woke.
But
they were like, there's something here that I don't like.
They were like in sleep paralysis.
Yeah.
And they're like, I don't think.
Yeah.
I don't think this is right.
They hear the alarm clock going off.
Vaguely.
Yeah.
Yeah. However, it does kind of cement a version of Caliban in the British consciousness. In contrast, there's another influential production of The Tempest around the turn of the century that rearranges the text and, quote, established Caliban as the star of the show, unquote. The show, however, was rife with imperial overtones and ended in a very pro-imperial final tableau.
No!
I know. We can't have nice things.
I know.
For a while.
Yeah.
So while the show recognized Caliban as not a comic character, at least, it ended with Caliban seated on a rock, silhouetted and watching the restored ship sail away. The actor's published thoughts on Caliban indicates that he believed that, quote, Caliban regrets being deprived of the human companions and lost without the civilizing influence exerted upon him by Prospero and his companions, unquote. So while the missing link Calibans were political in that connections had been made between the concept of the missing link and the idea of there existing some sort of underdeveloped native in non-theatrical concepts and like the tying together, this version clearly made Caliban an, quote, ignorant native to whom the colonist Prospero had brought an enlightenment, which he had spurned before learning its true value, unquote. And contemporary audiences, they understood that was the message of this production, but it was still controversial. One audience member who saw this as his first play at the age of 55 points out that Caliban's claim to the island is exactly like the indigenous people's case against colonization. And he expressed feeling a, quote, sting of conscience, unquote, and thought of the Ndebele people and King Lobinula who fought against British colonization in modern-day Zimbabwe. So even though this production was pro-imperialist, we have audience members who are going, whoa, like, ooh, again, starting to wake up a little bit.
Yeah.
And connecting, oh, this is kind of like what just happened.
What we do, yeah.
This writer continues to like throw other allegories out there for Caliban and the Tempest, including some that are conflicting with his sting of conscience, as he put it, and identifying Caliban with indigenous people against colonization. He also then goes on to allegorize Caliban as, quote, the British electorate deluded by the politicians into attacking the Boers, unquote, possibly being unaware of the contradictions between that analysis, comparing Caliban to indigenous people who were colonized to the British electorate going and fighting the Dutch Huguenot colonizers of South Africa. He goes on and has some other takes that we'd find problematic, and I'm not going to get into because they're not really relevant.
Yeah, I mean, people are full of contradictions.
Yeah. So these two turn-of-the-century performances establish Caliban as, quote, a barometer of attitudes to imperialism and democracy, unquote, in the 20th century productions of The Tempest. As I mentioned at the very beginning, this is sort of the history of Caliban as that touch point of like, how is this production engaging with the themes of colonialism, racism, and classism? And this is the moment where it really clicks in for the first time. And it's not just like, oh, we see some productions, they're maybe not like thinking through all the way. This continues during and after the First World War, and the, quote, missing link / native interpretation was the norm against which Calibans of the 20s were being judged, unquote. So critics continue to react against the missing link idea, but they really don't extend their reactions to why they have a problem with that. Like, they don't really dive into the connotations of making Caliban a missing link. They're just like, we don't like this, even though it is sort of like the norm.
Theaters are not adapting to the fact that audiences and critics are icked out by the missing link.
Mm-hmm.
But then there are no real investigations of like, okay, well, what does this mean? And it doesn't end up finding its place on the stage.
Yeah. And the critics are not rejecting the connotations. Like, they're not going, this is a problem because we don't like the racist implications of this. They're like,
yeah,
we don't like him as a monkey. That's it. Yeah.
Okay.
So then the 30s and 40s continue to see, quote, a broad pattern of incidental references to simian and missing link Calibans, unquote. So we continue to see this. But we also see critics continuing to write about colonial interpretations of Caliban. And then in January 1934, we see the appearance of the first black-faced Caliban in England, which led to, quote, virtually no critical comment except for complaints that the black came off on Trinculo and Stefano, unquote. So no critical response to that except for the makeup came off.
The makeup, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just shocked at the kind of lack of response.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
The pinch, if you will.
A pinch of the response.
Yeah.
To what is like relatively a recent development in the portrayal of Caliban. Then when we get into the 50s and 60s, which happens to be a period of British withdrawal from empire, there are very few productions of The Tempest, and the majority do not really engage with colonialism, or at least the criticism that we have of them now does not really engage with new colonial insight. Some productions in the 60s reference colonial analysis, but appear to have really, quote, failed to convey the point with enough vigor to elicit a critical response, unquote. However, the 60s also saw publication of 3 sociological studies, quote, in which the Prospero-Caliban relationship was taken as a paradigm of imperialism, unquote. So while the theaters aren't really engaging with it, or when they are, it's not made clear enough to audiences and critics that that's part of what they're trying to do, academics are starting to really publish papers about Prospero-Caliban and imperialism. First, we have George Lanning's The Pleasures of Exile, which discusses Prospero as a colonist and Caliban as, quote, the West Indian who has an alien language and culture imposed on him, unquote. Then, in Prospero's Magic, Some Thoughts on Class and Race, Philip Mason discusses Ariel and Caliban as Black nationalists in response to O. Manani's Prospero and Caliban, The Psychology of Colonization, which, quote, used an analogy between Caliban and the natives and Prospero and the colonists in his study of the French in Madagascar, unquote. So we start to see some scholars starting to engage with the parallels between Prospero, Caliban, and colonists and native peoples. Then we get to the 1970 revival of The Tempest at the Mermaid, directed by Jonathan Miller, which, quote, offered a full-scale colonial analysis, unquote, partly influenced by Manani's study, that last study that I mentioned, as well as Miller's, quote, own reading of accounts of the Elizabethan voyage of exploration, unquote, like the sea voyage, which we've talked about, as well as a production of the play The Old Glory by Robert Lowell, which depicted Puritan sailors making Native Americans drunk. So Miller was influenced by all these things to really make an overtly colonial analysis, production that was overt in its colonial analysis. This production also featured Norman Beaton and Rudolph Walker, who were the first Black actors to play Ariel and Caliban in England.
Let that date set in.
This production is also where the idea of Ariel as the more accomplished servant who is going along with Prospero and has adapted to serve Prospero, and Caliban as, quote, a detribalized field hand with faint memories of matrilineal gods, unquote, is first seen. So the idea of both of them being servants who have been treated explicitly differently and reacted explicitly differently to colonization. This is that production, where that comes from. In general, critical response to this production was favorable, although one review dismissed the concept as, quote, colonialism is something that Shakespeare had never heard of, unquote. Which, your face.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. As we know, these ideas were starting in Shakespeare's time, even though we did not have the word colonialism for them.
Yes.
Yeah.
There was a colony named after Elizabeth, who lived while Shakespeare was writing plays.
Right.
Like, come on.
Come on. It had started.
Yeah. Proto-colonialism.
Yep. Then from 1970 on, we see more colonial themes represented on stage in The Tempest, and even productions that were not focused on highlighting these themes can't escape their presence anymore. Theater as an industry and audiences and critics really understand that there are colonial themes in The Tempest. At the time of writing this article in 1983, Griffiths notes that, quote, some emphasis on colonialism is now expected, unquote, when producing The Tempest.
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, there has been 40 years of theater since this article, 40 years of Tempests, some of which we've talked about in previous episodes. Like we talked about on our last Tempest episode, what does having a Prospera do in this and removing the patriarchy from this? And we are still engaging with The Tempest as a proto-colonial piece of theater with these messages. I also did a reading, and I owe a great debt of gratitude to the team at Borderlands Shakespeare Collectiva and their incredible bibliography that they have available on their website, borderlandshakespeare.org. I read Ruben Espinosa's Beyond the Tempest, Language, Legitimacy, and La Frontera, as well as the article that is referenced within that article, Sam Favette's Shakespeare's The Tempest is Barred from Arizona Public Schools from the Wall Street Journal, to talk just really briefly about how the ideas that this play contains colonial themes are so understood today as like, well, duh. Well, yes, it does. It inherently does. There's no way you can avoid it. Just as an example, if you are not aware, in 2010, Governor Janet Brewer signed Arizona State House Bill 2281 into law, which prohibits courses and classes that, quote, promote the overthrow of the United States government, promote resentment toward a race or class of people, are designed primarily for pupils of a particular ethnic group, or advocate ethnic solidarity instead of the treatment of pupils as individuals, unquote. This measure, Ruben Espinosa notes, the lawmakers who are advocating for it were arguing that programs like the Mexican American Studies program in Tucson Unified School District, quote, kindled anger against the U.S. government. But the truth is that the program instilled an important sense of self for these high school Latinxes by allowing them to explore such a significant aspect of their identities, and this in turn influenced the way they approached their general studies. Indeed, a 2011 University of Arizona published report confirmed the efficacy of this program by finding that offering Mexican American studies increased graduation rates, grades, and college enrollment for Latinxes. Perhaps Latinx success was the underlying threat. One man's confident, educated Latinx is another man's radical, it seems. Of particular prominence in this controversy was The Tempest, a play taught in the Mexican American Studies program in Tucson, and one that found its way into the infamous list of banned books that this bill brought about, unquote. So, in banning this Mexican American Studies program, the Arizona State House Bill 2281 was taking away a program that was effective in increasing graduation rates, grades, and college enrollment for a specific population. And one of the things that was banned as part of it was the teaching of The Tempest in Arizona schools. Because, according to the Wall Street Journal, Curtis Acosta, one of the former teachers of the program, wrote, quote, I asked if I could start teaching Shakespeare's The Tempest, and was told no, due to the themes that are present, and the likelihood of avoiding discussions of colonization, enslavement, and racism were remote, unquote. The Tempest is now so intertwined with our examinations of colonization, enslavement, and racism that it was deemed by the state of Arizona to no longer be teachable, because The Tempest would violate this law that prohibits teaching material that could promote the overthrow of the United States government or resentment towards a race or class of people,
Yeah.
or is designed for peoples of a particular ethnic group or to advocate ethnic solidarity.
Yeah.
So the reason why I highlight this is to just show how far, how like we have made a turn in our understanding of this play, and that it is now seen as so embedded in there that it falls under this
Banned book
this
list.
book banning. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That is quite a journey from Shakespeare's The Tempest, Shakespeare's play, which we say like proto-colonialism was a part of Shakespeare's world. And so it makes sense that proto-colonial ideas are in the play.
Yeah.
But then there's this period of like avoidance or selecting another kind of framework for the play, just disengaging from colonialism and imperialism. And then there's this turn back to being like, wait, I see this here. Like even that, sleep paralysis. The inklings.
The like small little like, oh, you almost got it. You almost.
Into like,
yeah.
And now you're so right. Like you cannot avoid thinking about that because we live in a world where we've had decades and centuries of certain kinds of experiences and history that it's just there.
And to see that this play has gone from a play that was at one point being produced with like pro-imperial themes to now being like, yep, we're going to ban it. To see, Caliban go from comic relief to a moment where he is representing rebellion and social movements of the 1850s to being dehumanized with Darwin, and now again being a touch point to have conversations about colonization, racism, and enslavement, and that people are still reacting to him as this touch point.
Yeah. The legacy of Caliban informs, and we're continuing to build, like Shakespeare is a living document, and we're continuing to build who Shakespeare is, why Shakespeare is on our stages, in our classrooms, in our books.
We are still engaging with it.
That's true. And in some ways, I kind of hope that, unlike Prospero, who requests to be set free, and sometimes I'm like, let's set Caliban free.
Yeah. I think that's a great place to end it.
And if you've made it to the end of this episode, Elyse and I have a request for all of you.
We would love for you to rate and review the podcast on your favorite podcast app. Write us a quick message about maybe something you learned in this episode, something you found of value, or tell us about a previous episode that was really impactful to you. That way we can outbalance the 1-star reviews who are upset about us decentering dead white men.
Yeah, that will bump us up in the algorithm, and then more people like us will be drawn to the podcast. So we really hope that if you have a few moments, you could go ahead and take the time to do that and counterbalance the few people who don't get the work of the podcast. So if you can, please rate and review. We'd love to hear from you.
And with that, thank you for listening.
I'm Kourtney Smith.
And I'm Elyse Sharp.
This is Shakespeare Anyone?
Thank you so much for listening to Shakespeare Anyone. Works referenced in this episode are available in the episode description. Our theme music is Neverending Minute by Sounds Like Sander.
If you would like to support us, visit shakespeareanyone.com/support or check out the links in our episode description. You can also hit the subscribe button, like us, leave a comment, write a review, share us on social media, tell a friend about us, all the things. We'd appreciate it. For more, you can visit our website, shakespeareanyone.com, or follow us on Instagram at shakespeareanyonepod.
Now, because you listened all the way to the end of the credits, here is a completely random Shakespeare quote for you. From Henry IV, Part 1, Act 2, Scene 4, said by Peto. Nothing but papers, my lord.